Thank you very much, Leonora. Thank you for the invitation. I am really very, very happy that I could come here and meet you, talk to you. For me, the past 3 years when I was in charge of the Schools of Political Studies was a thrilling experience, and I enjoyed very much working with great people like Leonora Krezu, who were running this network. I think one of the peculiarities of this network was that the Kosovo school, the Prishtina school, was treated on an equal footing with all the other European schools, despite the fact that Kosovo is not, as of yet, a member of the Council of Europe. For the past almost 12 years, the Kosovo school, the Prishtina school, was treated like a regular European member of this family. And I think that was quite great, and the big contribution of the management of the school to the promotion of the interests of Kosovo on the European level was very visible. So thank you very much, Leonor. Thank you. Thank you for not forgetting me after I left Strasbourg, and now I'm back in Warsaw. The topic of my talk is state, society, and the European identity. And I wanted to give you a more global and more historiosophic, if you wish, perspective of this topic. I heard yesterday how emotional sometimes you are when discussing the state-building process in Kosovo. And indeed, you are the youngest state in Europe. Although you have achieved quite a lot, this process of state-building, developing the right model for your statehood is far from being completed. You can rely on the support of the international community, but by the end of the day, the most important decisions will have to be made by you yourself. You have misgivings. I heard yesterday some of them, and I'm aware that there are people both inside this country and outside who believe that the present situation is a temporary one, transitional one, which probably doesn't help you in finding the right solutions. But I can offer you my encouragement to persevere, to continue your state-building effort, because I believe, like some other people, that the quality of your state will determine your future. And in general, the quality of state determines the well-being of the society, the well-being of the individuals, citizens, and the future of people who live within the state. My point of departure is that when you, being the youngest state in Europe, you are looking around trying to find the inspiration or the models in the most developed countries, states in the Western family, the existing model of the state is experiencing one of the most serious strains and challenges in many years. In fact, we are perhaps on the verge of a major revolution affecting the shape of political institutions, starting with the state, which may change a lot of things that we took for granted. It is true that all our institutions, the state, democracy, democratic institutions, but also courts, rule of law, everything connected with it, was established, was developed not so long ago, 200 and 300 years ago. And now, with so many new developments, probably these existing institutions are coming to their limits in terms of their efficiency and applicability. What are the processes affecting the efficiency of all these institutions? It's mainly the technological revolution, technology compressing the time and the space. It's the emergence of virtual space, emergence of the virtual state, virtual citizen. It is the fact that the state is losing control over its territory, because after all, what is the most basic definition of a state? It is a political institution exercising control over a certain territory and people living within this territory. Today, the borders are becoming more and more transparent. For any state, even the most powerful one, it becomes increasingly difficult to control things within the prescribed territory. In many ways, we are talking about a deterioration of a state. Territory is losing its importance. Territory no longer matters as it used to. My point of departure is a book which I would recommend to all of you to read. Is entitled The Fourth Revolution, written by John Micklethwaite and Adrian Wooldridge, both editors of The Economist. Their message is the following. Good government decides the future. The West has been successful as a civilization because it was capable of inventing the right model of state. We have gone through three major revolutions. The first revolution gave us the model of a nation state. It's the 17th century. What is nation state? Nation state is association with the concept of sovereignty, with the concept of the monopoly of the use of force, use of enforcement. It is associated with civil rights, that only state can put me in prison, can charge me with legal charges, and that the basic principle applying to the relation between the state and the citizen is the rule of law. The second big revolution was the revolution inventing the liberal state, the beginning of the 19th century. The advent of capitalism, the establishment of the bourgeois society. The liberal state gave us democracy, political rights, in particular the freedom of assembly, the freedom of expression, freedom of speech, etc. And it gave us meritocratic government. No longer people were deciding about the future of a state based on their birth, whom they were born, but on the basis of the quality of their capabilities. The liberal state gave the voting rights, gave a saying to all citizens living within the territory of a state. The third big revolution was the invention of the welfare state. Welfare state, the beginning of the 20th century. Like the first revolution gave us the civil rights, the second revolution gave us the political rights, the third revolution gave us the social rights. Healthcare, pension scheme, paid holidays, paid leave, etc., etc. This is the contribution of the welfare state. And now John Micklethwaite and Adrian Woolrich are saying we are approaching slowly the fourth revolution. Why the fourth revolution is inevitable? Mainly because the welfare state as we know it is not sustainable. It is not sustainable because of demography, the aging of the societies. It is not sustainable because of the debt, of the fact that most states simply cannot afford this lavish offer of social benefits and social rights, but also because of technology, because of everything connected with new opportunities offered by the technological progress. The question is whether the West is capable of inventing a new model of a state. There is an alternative. They call it the Asian model, as embodied in the concept of a state practice in Singapore or in China, where essentially you have more limited approach to the social rights and more limited approach to the political rights. But in both cases, as they try to prove, this model of a state is working quite well. The answer is the Asian model has limited value. It is not the model of the future. So the West should make an effort and design a new model. I am in agreement with them, believing, yes, that we are approaching slowly a moment of turbulence, a moment where we will have to redesign the existing institutions. But I don't think that the explanation is simply the non-sustainability of the welfare state model. I think the reasons are much deeper. I think that the processes affecting the existing model of the state are much more powerful than simply the factor of debt, the factor of demography, or the factor of technology. My assumption is that more and more the shape of our political institutions, including the state, including the model of democracy, etc., will be determined along the axis the state versus the individual. When we look at the state and at the individual, us private citizens, as units, we can say that never before both the state and the individual have been stronger. The state is stronger than before in its capacity to monitor the activities, the behavior of its citizens, but also in terms of intervening into the economy, in terms of introducing redistribution policies, etc., etc. Also the individual, thanks to the new technologies, internet and others, the individual has an unprecedented feeling of freedom and sovereignty. The paradox is that both the state and the individual do not trust each other. The state wants to control the individual more than ever, and the individual doesn't control the state. All the not so distant developments around the snooping affair, as you all remember, and other related phenomena showed how distrustful the individual is towards the state. The big paradox is that both the state and individual want the other to be even stronger. The state wants the individual to take care of himself, herself, because it cannot provide the services needed. And the individual wants the state also to be more efficient and to provide more and more services. There were sociological analysis conducted in Poland in the midst of the economic crisis 2009, showing that people, the society, wants the state to provide more and more, starting from security, going through economic services like controlling prices, controlling employment, etc., going down to even a notion of ensuring moral equilibrium and moral order in the state. It's a big paradox, but it's true. And there is no contradiction in that. Overall, what we are seeing is a certain decay of power. There is another book which I would recommend to you by Moses Naim called The End of Power. And he's showing that so-called micropowers, citizens, civil society organizations, networks, are undermining the central power of the state. My point is that this relationship between the individual and the state, the empowerment of the individual in particular, will have a very big influence on the model of the state. The other megatrend which will influence the shape of political institutions, including the state, is the cosmopolitization of our societies. The cosmopolitization is reflected in two phenomena. One phenomenon is, of course, more polymorphic, more pluralistic image of the societies because of migration in particular. If you look at Europe, everywhere in most of the countries, the societies are becoming more and more diverse. And it's very difficult to control the migration flows. But also the other aspect is that it's more and more difficult for a state to control the loyalty of the citizens. For many people, and I think it is not something that you are not familiar with, people vote with their feet. If the state is inefficient, if the state cannot provide the basic services, people go somewhere else. It's not probably yet at the level of ibi patria ubi bene, meaning I call a country my fatherland when I feel well there, but something is happening to the extent that days when the state could dictate whom you should like and whom you dislike, who are your friends and your enemies, are over. You decide whether you like a country or not. These are the two megatrends, the empowerment of the individual and the cosmopolitization of the societies, which will influence the shape of the political institutions, starting with the state. My next point is this new factor of virtual state and virtual citizen. There are articles and there are books, and even there are already attempts to introduce a new category of citizenship. As you know, there is a European state even who invited guys from abroad to become a virtual citizen of the country. There was a country trying to define the character of this relationship, and it's unavoidable. Both the state and the citizen today have two faces. The states, they implement two sets of policies. There is one face of the state for the real world, and there is the other face of the state for the virtual state, for the virtual world. Some states are even at big contradiction. It means that in the virtual space, they do things that they would be ashamed of doing in the real physical space. And the same is with the individual. We have essentially two identities, the real one and the virtual thing. We say things in the virtual space that we would be ashamed of saying in the real one. Not all of us, but there are some, as you know, who have double speak, double identities, etc., etc. And virtualization of a state is also a process which is unstoppable. Today, at least, something which was an axiom 100 years ago, that the size of your territory determines the might of a state, is no longer true. It started with the end of the Second World War, and two countries are quoted as examples. If you take Germany and Japan, who lost quite big chunks of, at least in case of Germany, of territory after the Second World War, suddenly became new powers, more powerful now than before, with less and less territory. You have small entities like the Singapore I mentioned, or Hong Kong, very tiny entities, states or cities, who are quite powerful in terms of economic might, welfare of citizens, etc., etc. So virtual state, virtualization of a state produces a situation where the size of the territory no longer matters. And this virtualization of the relationship between the state and the individual opens new space for the development of political institutions. There is, however, a hidden, invisible element in this equation, the state versus the individual. The big loser. And people say that's the society. The stronger the state and the stronger the individual, the weaker the society. I have prepared even some quotations which were opposing from many years ago the state and the society. Thomas Paine in particular, who was saying society is produced by our wants and governments by our wickedness, etc., etc. But it's true. Society is the loser. Alain de Botton, another philosopher, was trying to explain this big paradox, why we as individuals want the state to be stronger at the expense of weakening the society. He said the explanation is very simple. Because if you want the society to do something for you, you have to ask. You have to say please. And when you get something, you have to thank. You have to say thank you. Vis-à-vis the state, you don't have to ask and you don't have to thank. You don't say please and don't say thank you. And it's much easier. Huh? Much, much easier to do away without please and thank you. So what's the future? What's the future? Now, in simple terms, there are two schools. One is the socialization of the state, meaning the individual taking more and more control of the state, or nationalization of the society, meaning the state more and more controlling the people. My response is not very original. The future is with the state. I'm not an anarchist. I don't believe, or a Marxist, I don't believe that we will be seeing a kind of demise or decay of the state. We need the state. And a lot of problems that we are confronted with are because the state is too weak, also in its international dimension. It's not only the problem of the failed states, but what Parag Khanna is calling orphan states, he counts that 1/3 of the international community are states which are states only by name, but they are not capable, without an assistance from abroad, to perform any basic functions of a state. Neither security, no justice, no welfare. So my solution, yes, a new type of state, bringing on three factors: the traditional state, the cosmopolitan element, the international element, role of institutions, international institutions, and the third, new roles of individuals, new civil society activities, but the relationship there will be based on more partnership and more equality. And coming now to the European factor, I believe that the European Union and the European process has a unique potential to develop this new model of a state. We can talk about the European identity, but I don't want to go beyond the 30 minutes time that you offered to me. We can discuss some of the issues that I plan to include into my introduction in our discussion. But my point is that the European process contributed to the weakening of the at least two aspects of the existing model of the state. The European integration undermined the model of a nation state. It's true. By transgressing the limitations of nation state, it helped to somehow moderate the influence of a nation state on our societies. It also helped to see with clarity the limitations of the welfare state model. It showed that the existing welfare model, based on welfare gaps, cannot function properly. Of course, there were accusations about social tourism, migration, but in fact, you cannot have open borders, freedom of movement, and equality of European citizens, and on the other hand, national approaches to welfare and related things. So I say, yes, the European project showed that you have to think about a new model for welfare state. And I think that this European project, being able to establish the right equilibrium between the nation state, the international factor, and the private citizen activism, can be the fulcrum of a new model of a state. I don't want to say that this should be now the strategic mission of the European project and the European Union in particular. That would be too much. European Union is about very pragmatic things. Nevertheless, if the European Union fails to produce this model, then the challenge posed in the book, The Fourth Revolution, the West being capable of producing this model, will be lost, because nowhere else I can see a chance for the Western so-called civilization to produce such a model. So, yes, be prepared for a new revolution. I think that, like at the beginning of the 19th century, the concept of citizen replaced the concept of subject. Today, a new concept will be born which will replace the concept of a citizen. It will have to change the existing relationship between the state and the individual, which is based on very strong asymmetry. Jokingly, I sometimes say that if a citizen is disloyal to the state, it's called treason. But if a state is disloyal to its citizen, it is called raison d'etat. In this very, simple sentence, I can show how asymmetric the relationship is. Whether we will invent new terms replacing citizenship, I don't know. My preferred term is stakeholder, but it's clumsy. I take it, it will not fly. We don't have to change the names, we don't have to change the text, but we will change the contents. And here I'm pretty sure. We will see probably the end of the lifetime contract between the citizen and the state. We will see more freedom in determining a citizen of which country I want to be. And what will also be important is that this new citizenship will involve new responsibilities, including the responsibility to follow the values and the norms which would be associated with the state. Okay, I hope I haven't taken you too far. I haven't distracted you, and I haven't somehow destroyed your focus on the short-term agenda of Kosovo. Nevertheless, what I wanted you to understand that there is a broader perspective and that you are part of it because you are young enough to be able to check whether what I was saying is true or not.